In this new life as disciples, Matthew's words offer advice and assurances from Matthew 10:24 through 39. Disciples are greater than their teacher, and slaves aren't greater than their master. It's enough for disciples to be like their teacher and slaves like their master. If you have called the head of the house Beelzebul, it's certain that they will call the members of his household by even worse names. Therefore, don't be afraid of those people, because nothing is hidden that won't be revealed, and nothing secret that won't be brought into the open. What I say to you in the darkness, tell in the light, and what you hear whispered, announce from the rooftops. Don't be afraid of those who kill the body, but can't kill the soul. Instead, be afraid of the one who can destroy both body and soul in hell. Aren't 2 sparrows sold for a small coin? But one of them will fall to the ground without your Father knowing about it already. Even the hairs on your head are all counted. Don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Therefore, everyone who acknowledges me before people, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But everyone who denies me before people, I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven. Don't think that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I haven't come to bring peace, but a sword. I've come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. People's enemies are members of their own households. Those who love father or mother more than me aren't worthy of me. Those who love son or daughter more than me aren't worthy of me. Those who don't pick up their crosses and follow me aren't worthy of me. Those who find their lives will lose them, and those who lose their lives because of me will find them. This is the word of life.
Thanks be to God. Thank you, Tim. So there's a lot of content in that scripture, and it's not one of the easiest ones to preach. So we're going to walk our way in. 6 years ago, news headlines included things like these. This is the last time I preached on this particular thing, so this is where they come from. Black women matter, with the statement at the time that black women and children were being killed without reason. The Seattle Pride Parade was prominent, and now June is recognized as Pride Month. A Catholic bishop instructed priests in his central Illinois diocese to deny communion last rites and funeral rites to people in same-sex loving relational marriages unless they repented. And at the same time, Pope Francis called for less dogma, more grace, and pointed out that the Eucharist is not a prize for the perfect, but a powerful medicine and nourishment for the weak. 6 years ago, South Korea tested missiles as President Moon spoke of the need to dominate the North. There was a massive fire in a London high-rise. Captain Sully Sullenberger's split-second decisions and extraordinary landing on the Hudson River in New York saved the lives of all 155 people aboard his U.S. Airways Flight 1549. Game of Thrones was a binge thing. A North Carolina televangelist was indicted for tax fraud and evasion, and ultimately denying all appeals. He is now serving time. And Chinese state news stated that 141 people were missing after a landslide that buried the town of Xinmo in the Sichuan province. The number missing was later reduced to 93, but more than 300 more were injured. And so you might be asking why these particular snapshots. Perhaps to emphasize how little we seem to have moved the needle since then. There are similar versions of these stories, mass shootings and multiple weather-related incidents, global political posturing, and more things that still populate the news today. So much so that it would be easy to get lost in all of it, to wonder where we're really going or if we're even going anywhere at all, and to ask what really matters. So in all of that verbiage that you heard in today's scripture reading, I will offer that the answer may well be embedded in today's message. There's always a technical, and there it is. I will offer that the answer may be embedded in today's passage from Matthew in all of those words that are comforting and somewhat terrifying, because he reminds us that God takes note of every sparrow that falls to the ground, and that every hair on each of our heads is counted, that God takes in even these smallest and seemingly most insignificant things, tells us that everything matters. So if we focus on God as we heard about doing so from the first scripture today in Romans, and we're armed with the certainty that everything matters, maybe we can work our way through today's reading. In last week's reading, if you were with us from Matthew, we learned that Jesus has already instructed the disciples to travel light. No gold, no silver, no bag, no resume, just a tunic and maybe an extra pair of sandals, maybe. And their faith in God. Nothing else is needed or matters in situations such as this. Knowing that he's sending them out on a mission that is not without its risks, today Matthew tells us that Jesus effectively packs their bags with a set of instructions for these 12. Those who are more familiar to us, like Peter, James, and John, and as well as those we might not know so well, like Bartholomew and Thaddeus and Simon the Canaanite. It's important to realize that Matthew is writing for a community that claims a relationship, a kinship with these apostles who gave up everything to follow Jesus. So you can imagine that community leaning in to listen now to what Jesus is telling them to do. They're watching and waiting to see how God is sending them forth, what the disciples are to know, and what they need to remember to get the job done. That same audience is undoubtedly also backing up just a little bit, wrestling with how much they too may have to give up and what risks they will endure if they follow this same path, and whether or not they really feel ready to go, or maybe they just want to turn and run. So let's take a look at the instructions we heard. First, a disciple is not above the teacher, nor a slave above the master. Or, as phrased in the Message translation, a student doesn't get a better desk than her teacher, and a laborer doesn't make more money than his boss. Be content then, pleased even when you, my students, my harvest hands, get the same treatment I get. This is Jesus speaking. If they call me, the master, dung face, what can the workers expect? All bets are off in this new life of yours. The rules you become accustomed to simply don't apply. So it's enough for the disciple to be like the teacher. Jesus tells us, be like me, he says. And then he proceeds to tell us how difficult it's going to be. They're going to call you names, he says. Part of this may refer both backward and forward to an encounter with a religious establishment who tried to claim that Jesus had power over demons because he was a demon himself. They missed that even when you're doing good, you're vulnerable to attack. He also said nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. Again, from the Message, it sounds like this. Eventually, everything is going to be out in the open, and everyone will know how things really are. So don't hesitate to go public now. Evildoers' words and deeds will be revealed and judged in due time. So be emboldened to speak God's good news boldly and without fear. Which might translate to, do not be afraid, for I am with you. Don't wait to live into this new life because of the things that you hear and see. I've already told you it won't be easy, but waiting simply prolongs the time when all will be revealed. If we step out now and live this life now, it changes the way things look, yeah? Here's another one. Everyone who acknowledges me before others, I will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before others, I will also deny before my Father in heaven. The Message puts it this way: stand up for me against world opinion, and I'll stand up for you before my Father in heaven. And if you turn tail and run, do you really think I'll cover for you? Ooh, I don't know about you, but I'm like, oh, it's a tough one because it feels a bit like the do not be afraid piece and I am with you piece just got pulled out like a rug from under our feet, yes? And yet Jesus persists with this clear message: be like me. Put God first in thought and word and deed. Live into God's kingdom now by being kind and grateful and authentic, and let your light shine. Invest in moving forwards, not backwards. It reminds me of something a friend of mine once said: life is too short to engage with those whose countenance is purely negative, so I look for ways to gently acknowledge them and then move on. When they're ready, they'll catch up. Even so, I can almost feel Matthew's audience tensing up as the instructions go deeper and feel harsher as he essentially tells them, be willing to give your life away for the sake of the kingdom, just like me. Oh. Know that even those closest to us may think that we've gone crazy. Remember when Jesus' family showed up to take him away because they thought he was crazy? When you or I, when we decide to be like Jesus, there's no guarantee that those around you are going to cheer you on. All disturbing words, to be sure, but I wonder, perhaps Jesus wanted to touch on the most basic, heart-connected part of human life to get our attention. Remember all those headlines we started with? How easily we can get caught up in other things or default to what we know or what is familiar or hold on. I wonder, might Jesus be this forward in his instruction? I'm going to sever all these relationships you know so well, in order to teach us that even deeper, even more powerful and important, more meaningful things are all built on the love of God first and faith first. Because then he continues and says, those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. This is about dying to ourselves, is it not? The Message puts it this way: if your first concern is to look after yourself, you'll never find yourself. But if you forget about yourself and look to me, you'll find both yourself and me. Following Jesus was a costly thing to do in that time and place, a world broken and pressing down on them, a world desperately in need of good news. Sound familiar? It was costly then, yes, and risky too, and it is today. We accept the idea that there were early Christian martyrs who gave up their lives, literally, dramatically, and sometimes violently, for what they believed in. But there were also lesser-known Christians, everyday, ordinary folks, who suffered loss of family, place, security, respectability because they embraced a faith that challenged the social structures of the day, including the stability of the family itself, so that we could find a way to where we are now. They paved the way for all who would follow by pressing forward with love first, with kindness, with sharing first. Author and pastor Barbara Brown Taylor calls this passage a burr from Matthew's Gospel. One of those passages, she says, I wish he had never written down because it's difficult. And my face looks a lot like yours as we walk through this, kind of frowning and wondering and doing all of those things. When she wrestled with the text, she came out with an elegant understanding of its claim on us, the whole of this scripture. This is what she said. I am a daughter, she writes, a wife, a sister, an aunt, and each of those identities has shaped my life, but none of those identities fully contains me. I am Barbara. I am Christian. I am a child of God. That is my true identity, and all the others grow out of it. With her words, Taylor draws a sharp distinction between that identity as a child of God and all of the other roles we may play within our lives. What's the message? What matters is how we ground ourselves, what we do after we say yes to living a life in Jesus, because everything else grows from there, and all of it